Welcome to Chosen by Love, where fate brings hearts together in the most unexpected ways. Subscribe and join our growing family of story lovers. Tell us where you're watching from, and let's begin today's journey. The man everyone ignored would soon become the only man she could never forget. The rain had been falling over Boston for hours, turning the city into a blur of silver reflections and glowing streetlights. Water streamed down storefront windows, collected in the gutters, and splashed beneath the tires of passing cars. Most people hurried through the storm with their heads down, focused only on getting home. Adeline Hart pulled her coat tighter around her shoulders as she stepped out of Bellwood Books and Cafe, the small independent bookstore where she worked 6 days a week. The shop owner had finally locked the doors and headed home, leaving Adeline alone beneath the striped awning. It was almost 9 o'clock. Her feet ached after a 10-hour shift. Her paycheck was already stretched thin between rent, utilities, and the stack of overdue bills waiting on her kitchen counter. Yet despite everything, she paused before walking away. Across the street, near the entrance of a closed pharmacy, sat a man completely alone. Most people passed him without even looking. A few glanced his way and quickly looked elsewhere. The man sat motionless beneath a flickering street lamp, rain soaking the shoulders of his dark coat. A small backpack rested beside him. His head was lowered, his hands folded together as if he no longer expected anything from the world. Adeline stared for a moment. Something about him felt different. She couldn't explain why. Maybe it was the way he carried himself. Maybe it was the strange calmness in his posture despite the cold. Or maybe it was because loneliness recognized loneliness. She looked away and started toward the subway entrance. Then she stopped. Her grandmother used to tell her something when she was little. If kindness only appears when life is easy, then it isn't really kindness. Adeline sighed softly. Her rent was late. Her refrigerator was nearly empty. She had enough problems of her own. But the image of the man sitting in the rain refused to leave her mind. A minute later she found herself walking back inside the cafe through the employee entrance. The espresso machine had already been cleaned, but there was still a little coffee left. She poured it into a paper cup, added cream and sugar, then grabbed one of the blueberry muffins scheduled to be thrown away in the morning. 5 minutes later she crossed the street through the rain. The man looked up as she approached. For a brief second their eyes met. Adeline froze. His eyes were an unusual shade of gray, sharp and intelligent despite the exhaustion behind them. They didn't look like the eyes of someone who had spent years living on the street. "Hi," she said awkwardly. "I figured you might want something warm." The man stared at the coffee in her hand. "You don't have to do that." His voice surprised her. Calm. Educated. Controlled. "I know," Adeline replied. "But I wanted to." For a moment neither moved. Then he slowly accepted the cup. The warmth seemed to spread through his fingers. "Thank you." "You're welcome." Rain continued tapping against the pavement around them. Adeline noticed his hands trembling slightly. At first she thought it was the cold. Then she realized his face looked unusually pale. "Are you okay?" she asked. "I'm fine." The answer came too quickly. He swayed slightly as he stood. The coffee nearly slipped from his hand. Adeline's stomach tightened. "You don't look fine." "It's nothing." Before he could finish the sentence he stumbled. Not dramatically. Just enough to confirm what she already suspected. The man was sick. Very sick. Adeline stepped forward instinctively. "When was the last time you ate?" He hesitated. "I don't remember." The answer sent a wave of concern through her. She looked up and down the nearly empty street. Nobody else seemed to notice. Nobody stopped. Nobody cared. The wind picked up, carrying another burst of cold rain through the city. Adeline glanced at the trembling stranger, then toward the subway entrance that would take her home. Common sense told her to leave. Every warning she had ever heard echoed in her mind. But something stronger refused to let her walk away. She took a slow breath. "I have a couch," she said quietly. The man blinked. "What?" "Just for tonight. You need somewhere warm." For the first time uncertainty crossed his face. Almost as if accepting help was harder for him than enduring the storm. Adeline adjusted her grip on her umbrella and offered a small smile. "Come on," she said. "Before we both catch pneumonia." The stranger looked at her for several long seconds. Then he nodded once. Neither of them realized that by the time the sun rose the next morning, one secret would begin unraveling, a life neither of them ever expected. The apartment was smaller than most people would consider comfortable, but to Adeline it was home. The narrow living room held a worn gray couch, a bookshelf overflowing with second-hand novels, and a tiny kitchen tucked into one corner. Warm light spilled from a floor lamp beside the window as rain continued tapping softly against the glass. The stranger stood just inside the doorway, looking around with quiet attention. Water dripped from his coat onto the entry rug. For a moment neither spoke. Adeline suddenly became aware of how unusual the situation was. She had brought a complete stranger into her apartment. A stranger whose name she did not even know. "You can put your backpack over there," she said, pointing toward a chair near the kitchen table. "Thank you." His voice remained calm despite the exhaustion weighing on him. Adeline handed him a clean towel. "Bathroom is down the hall. You should dry off before you get sick." A faint expression crossed his face. Almost surprise. As if he was not used to being cared for anymore. "You are very trusting," he said quietly. Adeline laughed nervously. "My friends would say I am too trusting. Maybe they are right. Maybe." For the first time a small smile appeared at the corner of his mouth, changed his entire face. Suddenly he looked younger, stronger, more familiar somehow. Not like someone who belonged on a sidewalk in the rain. 20 minutes later he emerged wearing a spare sweatshirt Adeline had found in her closet. Fit surprisingly well. She had heated a can of tomato soup and placed it beside a grilled cheese sandwich. On the table. The man stopped when he saw the meal. His expression softened. "You really did not have to do all this. You already said that." Adeline sat across from him. "And I am still ignoring it." For several moments the only sound was the gentle clink of a spoon against the bowl. The stranger ate slowly, almost carefully, as though he was forcing himself not to reveal how hungry he truly was. Adeline watched him over the rim of her coffee mug. The more she observed him, the stranger things became. His posture remained straight even when exhausted. His speech was precise. His manners felt effortless. Everything about him suggested education, confidence, and discipline. Nothing matched the image of a man living on the street. "What is your name?" she finally asked. He hesitated for a fraction of a second. "Gray." The answer came smoothly, but something about it felt incomplete. Adeline noticed. She said nothing. "Well, Gray," she replied, "I am glad you are not out there tonight." His eyes lifted toward hers. Something unreadable flickered there before disappearing. "So am I." Later that night Adeline spread an extra blanket across the couch. It was a thick navy blue blanket her grandmother had made years ago. The fabric was worn from use but still soft. She placed it beside a pillow. "You get the couch. And where will you sleep?" "In my room." "You barely know me." That seems to be the theme of the evening. Again that faint smile appeared. "Thank you, Adeline." She nodded and headed toward her bedroom. Yet sleep did not come easily. Through the thin wall she could hear occasional movement from the living room. Around midnight she stepped quietly into the hallway for a glass of water. The lamp was still on. Gray sat alone on the couch. He was not watching television. He was not sleeping. Instead he stared through the window at the rain-soaked city beyond. His expression looked distant, almost haunted. Adeline opened her mouth to speak but stopped. Something about the loneliness in his eyes made her retreat silently back to her room. The next morning sunlight filtered through the blinds. For the first time in days the storm had passed. Adeline woke to the smell of fresh coffee. Confused, she stepped into the kitchen. Gray stood beside the counter holding 2 mugs. "I found the coffee beans," he said. "I hope that was all right." Adeline blinked. "Most homeless men I know do not know how to operate a French press." The words escaped before she could stop them. A strange silence followed. Then Gray glanced down at the mug in his hand. "Maybe there is a lot you do not know about me." Before she could respond, a breaking news alert flashed across the television mounted above her bookshelf. The anchor appeared against a backdrop of skyscrapers. "The search continues this morning for billionaire technology executive Grayson Hale, who has now been missing for nearly 2 weeks. Hail Dynamics has declined further comment as investors grow increasingly concerned about the company's leadership situation. A photograph appeared on screen. Adeline looked up casually at first. Then her eyes widened. The image vanished after only a few seconds, but not before she noticed something strange. Something impossible. The man in the photograph looked unsettlingly familiar. Adeline kept her eyes on the television long after the photograph disappeared. Her pulse quickened. The resemblance had been impossible to ignore. The sharp jawline, the gray eyes, even the way the man carried himself in the picture looked familiar. Slowly she turned toward Gray. He stood motionless beside the kitchen counter, coffee mug in hand. His expression revealed nothing. "That is a strange coincidence," Adeline said carefully. Gray glanced toward the television. Maybe. It was not a denial. It was not an explanation either. The answer only deepened her suspicion. She studied him for several seconds before finally shaking her head. "You know what? It is none of my business." Something shifted in his expression then. Relief perhaps. Or gratitude. Adeline grabbed her purse and keys. "I have to get to work." Gray nodded. "Thank you for letting me stay. You still look like you need another day indoors." "I will be fine." She hesitated. Common sense told her she should not leave a stranger alone in her apartment. Yet something about him inspired trust she could not explain. "There is food in the refrigerator," she said. "Help yourself." "Adeline." She paused at the door. "Yes. Why did you help me?" The question caught her off guard. She shrugged lightly. "Because somebody should." Then she left. The bookstore remained quiet that morning. Rain clouds had finally cleared, allowing sunlight to stream through the front windows. Customers wandered between shelves while soft music played overhead. Yet Adeline found it impossible to focus. Her mind kept returning to the man sitting in her apartment. Around noon she climbed a small ladder to organize books in the local authors section. As she reached for a novel, a folded notebook slipped from her apron pocket and landed on the floor. It was her dream journal. A worn leather notebook filled with sketches, ideas, and plans for a bookstore she hoped to own someday. Most people never saw it. The dream felt too fragile to share. Adeline smiled as she picked it up. Maybe one day. Across town, Gray sat alone by the apartment window holding a cup of coffee. The city stretched before him beneath a bright blue sky. His eyes drifted toward the notebook resting on the kitchen table. Earlier he had noticed it accidentally while cleaning up breakfast dishes. He had not intended to look inside. Yet when a loose page slipped free, he caught sight of a hand-drawn floor plan. Curiosity got the better of him. The notebook contained dozens of sketches, cozy reading corners, community events, shelves lined with local authors. Notes written in careful handwriting filled every page. He turned another sheet. Estimated expenses, renovation costs, inventory projections, marketing ideas. Gray blinked slowly. This was not a fantasy. It was a business plan. Detailed, thoughtful, practical. He found himself smiling. Most people who dreamed never did the work. Adeline had already done the work. She simply lacked the opportunity. For the first time in weeks, his thoughts drifted away from corporate scandals, board meetings, and financial reports. Instead, he wondered how someone carrying so many burdens could still find room for hope. Late that afternoon, Adeline returned home. She expected to find Gray asleep on the couch. Instead, she discovered the apartment cleaner than she had ever seen it. Dishes were washed, counters wiped down. Even the leaning bookshelf had somehow been repaired. "How did you do that?" she asked, staring at the shelf. Gray looked up from the kitchen table. "It only needed a few adjustments. Most people would not even notice it was broken. I notice things." Adeline laughed softly. Apparently. She stopped when she noticed her notebook sitting neatly beside him. A flicker of embarrassment crossed her face. "You read it." Gray immediately stood. "Only a few pages." "I am sorry." To her surprise, he looked genuinely concerned. Adeline walked over and picked up the notebook. "It is okay." Gray hesitated before speaking. "Your bookstore could work." She stared at him. "You really think so?" "I know so." The certainty in his voice made her pause. Not because of what he said, because of how he said it. Like someone accustomed to evaluating businesses worth millions of dollars. Like someone whose opinion carried weight. Before she could ask another question, a black luxury SUV rolled slowly past the apartment building outside. Then another followed behind it. Both vehicles stopped at the curb. Gray froze. The color drained slightly from his face. His eyes locked onto the window. Adeline noticed immediately. Gray. He did not answer. Across the street, several men in dark suits stepped out of the vehicles and began scanning the buildings one by one. For the first time since she met him, genuine concern appeared in Gray's eyes. Adeline followed Gray's gaze toward the window. The two black SUVs remained parked across the street. The men standing beside them looked professional, alert, and completely out of place in her quiet neighborhood. One of them spoke into a phone while another studied the apartment building entrance. An uneasy feeling settled in her stomach. "Do you know them?" she asked softly. Gray remained silent for a moment. His jaw tightened slightly. "Yes." The single word confirmed everything and explained nothing. Adeline folded her arms. "I think it is time you tell me who you really are." Gray exhaled slowly. For the first time since arriving in her apartment, he looked tired in a way that had nothing to do with illness. It was the exhaustion of someone carrying a burden too long. "Not yet," he said quietly. "Please." Adeline should have been frustrated. Instead, she found herself looking into his eyes and seeing something unexpected. Fear. Not fear of being discovered. Fear of losing something. Before she could respond, one of the SUVs pulled away from the curb. Then the second followed. Within seconds, both vehicles disappeared around the corner. The tension in the room eased immediately. Gray released a breath he seemed to have been holding for several minutes. "Looks like they moved on," Adeline said. Gray nodded, but his expression remained troubled. That evening, neither mentioned the SUVs again. Instead, they shared takeout from a nearby diner and spent hours talking about everything except the questions hanging between them. Adeline learned that Gray had traveled extensively. He knew obscure facts about architecture, history, literature, and technology. Somehow every conversation became interesting when he was involved. What surprised her most was how attentively he listened. Most people waited for their turn to speak. Gray listened as though every word mattered. "Tell me about this bookstore," he said, nodding toward her notebook. Adeline smiled. "You really want to hear about that?" "Ido." Her face brightened immediately. She opened the notebook and began explaining her vision. A small bookstore with comfortable reading spaces, weekly author events, free literacy programs for children, community nights where neighbors could gather without spending money. As she spoke, Gray watched her carefully. The excitement in her voice transformed her completely. He found himself smiling without realizing it. "You believe in it," he said. "Of course I do." "Then why have you not started?" Her smile faded slightly. "Because dreams cost money." Gray looked down at the sketches spread across the table. Millions of dollars had crossed his desk throughout his career. Entire companies had been built and sold with a signature. Yet somehow this simple dream felt more meaningful than most business proposals he had ever reviewed. The next few days settled into an unexpected routine. Gray remained at the apartment while Adeline worked. Every evening they shared dinner. Sometimes they walked through the city after sunset. Sometimes they browsed bookstores or sat beside the Charles River watching lights shimmer across the water. For the first time in years, Gray experienced something his wealth had never purchased. Peace. No board meetings. No shareholders. No headlines. No people trying to impress him. Just ordinary moments with someone who expected nothing from him. One night they stopped at a small bakery just before closing. The owner recognized Adeline immediately and handed her a paper bag. "Leftovers," he said. "Take them." Outside, Adeline divided the pastries into smaller bags and began handing them to people living on the street. Gray watched quietly. "You do this often?" he asked. "Whenever I can." "Why?" She looked genuinely confused by the question. "Because everybody deserves kindness." Gray turned away before she could see the emotion crossing his face. The answer struck him harder than she realized. Most people treated kindness like a transaction. Adeline treated it like breathing. Natural. Effortless. Necessary. Later that night they returned to the apartment. Rain tapped lightly against the windows once again. Adeline curled up on one end of the couch while Grace sat on the other. A movie played quietly in the background. Neither paid much attention to it. The comfortable silence between them felt more valuable than conversation. Eventually Adeline yawned and stood. "Good night, Gray." "Good night, Adeline." She disappeared down the hallway. Gray remained where he was. His eyes drifted toward the navy blue blanket folded neatly beside him. The blanket she had given him on his first night. Slowly he picked it up. For reasons he could not explain, it had become the most valuable thing he owned. At that exact moment, several miles away in a glass conference room overlooking downtown Boston, a sharply dressed woman entered an emergency executive meeting. She placed a photograph on the table. The image showed Gray walking beside Adeline. Near the river. Every executive in the room fell silent. The woman looked around the table. "I found him," she said. The next morning began like any other. Adeline left for work carrying her coffee and a canvas tote bag filled with library books she planned to return during lunch. Gray stood near the apartment window watching her disappear down the sidewalk. For a long moment he remained there. Then his gaze shifted toward the skyline beyond the rooftops. His peaceful escape was ending. He could feel it. Less than an hour later a black sedan stopped in front of the building. A woman stepped out. She moved with confidence, dressed in a tailored charcoal suit that probably cost more than Adeline paid in rent each month. Her blonde hair was perfectly styled despite the morning breeze. Gray recognized her immediately. Victoria Kane, Chief Financial Officer of Hale Dynamics. One of the very few people he trusted. A knock echoed through the apartment. Gray closed his eyes briefly before opening the door. Victoria stared at him for several seconds. Relief flooded her face. "You are alive." Gray folded his arms. "Good morning to you too." She stepped inside without waiting for an invitation. "Do you have any idea what has happened since you vanished?" "I can imagine." "No. You cannot." Victoria placed a thick folder on the table. "The stock price has been unstable. Investors are demanding answers. The board is divided. Reporters are everywhere. Half the company thinks you are secretly negotiating a merger. The other half thinks you had a breakdown." Gray looked away. "Maybe they are all wrong." Victoria softened slightly. Grayson. The name hung in the room. The name he had hidden from Adeline. The name he had not spoken aloud in nearly 2 weeks. Victoria glanced around the apartment. Her eyes landed on the repaired bookshelf, the tiny kitchen, the navy blanket folded neatly on the couch. Understanding slowly appeared on her face. "This is where you have been." "Yes." "With her." Gray did not answer. He did not need to. "Victoria Said. She has no idea who you are, does she?" "No. And yet she brought you into her home." Gray looked toward the window. "She treated me like a person." The words came quietly. Victoria had worked beside him for nearly 10 years. She had seen him negotiate billion-dollar acquisitions without blinking. She had seen him dismantle arguments in boardrooms filled with powerful executives. Yet she had never heard that tone in his voice before. "You care about her," she said. Gray remained silent. Victoria smiled sadly. "That is what I thought." Several hours later Adeline was organizing new arrivals at the bookstore when her phone buzzed. It was a text from Gray. "Would you like dinner tonight?" She smiled immediately. The response surprised even her. "Yes. 7 o'clock? Perfect." She slipped the phone back into her pocket. For the rest of the afternoon she found herself looking at the clock more often than usual. Meanwhile Gray stood on the rooftop of a downtown office tower. The city stretched beneath him in every direction. Victoria stood nearby reviewing schedules. "The board meeting is tomorrow," she said. "You cannot avoid it any longer." Gray nodded. "I know. And what about Adeline?" His expression darkened. "I will tell her." "When?" "Soon." Victoria gave him a skeptical look. Soon is not a strategy. Gray knew she was right. Every day the truth remained hidden made the eventual revelation more difficult. Yet every day with Adeline felt precious. For the first time in years nobody wanted anything from him. Nobody cared about his company, his money, or his influence. She only cared whether he had eaten breakfast, whether he was feeling better, whether he was smiling. As evening approached, Gray returned to the apartment carrying groceries. He cooked dinner while waiting for Adeline to come home. The scent of garlic and herbs filled the small kitchen. At exactly 7 o'clock the front door opened. Adeline stepped inside and immediately froze. Two unfamiliar men in dark suits stood near the entrance. Victoria sat at the kitchen table, and Gray, dressed in an impeccably tailored navy suit, looked nothing like the man she had brought home from the rain. For several seconds nobody spoke. Then Victoria rose slowly from her chair. "Miss Hart," she said politely, "I believe we owe you an explanation." Adeline stood frozen near the doorway. Her eyes moved from the two men in suits to Victoria and finally to Gray. No, not Gray. Grayson. Suddenly every strange detail she had ignored came rushing back. The way he spoke. The way he carried himself. The business advice. The photograph on the television. The luxury vehicles. It all fit together now. Her chest tightened. "Grayson Hale," she said quietly. The room remained silent. Grayson took a step forward. "Adeline, I can explain." She laughed once, though there was no humor in it. "Can you?" Victoria glanced between them and immediately recognized she should leave. "We will wait downstairs," she said. Within moments the apartment was empty except for Adeline and Grayson. The familiar room suddenly felt smaller than ever. "How long?" she asked. "How long what? How long have you been lying to me?" Grayson lowered his eyes briefly. "I never intended for this to happen." "That is not an answer." The disappointment in her voice hurt more than any accusation. "The day you saw the news report I should have told you," he admitted. "Every day after that, I should have told you." Adeline looked away toward the bookshelf. The bookshelf he had repaired. The apartment he had cleaned. The meals they had shared. Every memory now felt uncertain. "You sat at my table. You listened to me talk about overdue bills. You listened to me worry about rent." Her voice trembled slightly. "All while knowing you were worth billions. I never laughed at you." "That is not the point." Grayson took another step forward. "Then tell me what the point is." Adeline met his eyes. "The point is that I trusted you." The words landed heavily between them. For several seconds neither moved. Finally Grayson spoke. "I disappeared because I was exhausted." His voice remained calm but carried a vulnerability she had never heard before. Every conversation became about money. Every relationship came with conditions. Every room I entered felt like a negotiation. Then I met you. Adeline folded her arms tightly. "So what was I? A social experiment?" "Never." The answer came instantly. "You were the first person in years who treated me like I mattered more than my title." Adeline wanted to believe him. That was the problem. Part of her still did. Which only made everything harder. She grabbed her coat from the chair. "I need some time." Grayson nodded slowly. "I understand." "Do you?" she asked softly. "Because right now it feels like I never knew you at all." She walked past him and out the door before he could answer. The cool evening air hit her face as she stepped onto the sidewalk. She kept walking. 1 block. Then another. Then another. By the time she reached the river, tears she had been holding back finally slipped free. Not because Grayson was a billionaire. Not because of his company or his wealth. Because somewhere along the way she had begun caring about him. Meanwhile Grayson remained alone in the apartment. The silence felt unbearable. His eyes drifted toward the navy blanket folded neatly on the couch. The blanket she had given him during the storm. Slowly he picked it up and sat down. For the first time since returning to his old life, the penthouses, private jets, and executive boardrooms waiting for him felt meaningless. The next morning the city woke up to breaking news. Grayson Hale had returned. Financial networks covered the story non-stop. Reporters crowded outside Hale Dynamics headquarters. Investors celebrated. Employees cheered. Across Boston, everyone seemed fascinated by the billionaire who had vanished and returned. Everyone except Adeline. She buried herself in work at the bookstore, trying not to think about him. It worked until lunchtime. A customer walked in holding a business magazine. Grayson's face covered the front page. Adeline immediately looked away. What she did not know was that somewhere inside Hale Dynamics, another story was unfolding. A senior board member named Damien Cross stared at a surveillance photograph of Adeline Hart and smiled coldly. If Grayson cared about her, Damien intended to use that fact to his advantage. Over the next several days, Adeline tried to return to normal life. She arrived at the bookstore early, organized shelves, helped customers, and smiled when necessary. On the surface, nothing had changed. Inside, everything had. Every time she passed the river where she and Grayson had walked together, memories returned. Every time she saw a news headline about Hale Dynamics, she looked away. Yet no matter how hard she tried, she could not completely erase him from her thoughts. Meanwhile, inside the glass headquarters of Hale Dynamics, Grayson threw himself into work. Meetings filled every hour. Investors demanded updates. Executives presented reports. The company continued moving forward, but Grayson felt as though he had left something important behind in a small apartment across town. Victoria noticed immediately. One evening she entered his office carrying a stack of documents. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked the city skyline glowing beneath the sunset. "You are staring out that window again," she observed. Grayson barely glanced up. "Am I? You have done it 3 times this afternoon." He sighed. "Is there a point to this conversation?" "Yes." Victoria placed the files on his desk. "Go talk to her." Grayson leaned back in his chair. She asked for space. Space and silence are not the same thing. Before he could answer, his phone buzzed. Victoria noticed the change in his expression immediately. "What happened?" Grayson stared at the screen. His jaw tightened. The message contained a link to a gossip website. At the top of the page sat a photograph of Adeline leaving the bookstore. The headline beneath it made his stomach drop. "Billionaire CEO's secret girlfriend hiding financial motives." The article was filled with speculation, anonymous claims, and fabricated accusations. According to the story, Adeline had manipulated Grayson into helping fund her business dreams. None of it was true. Yet thousands of people had already viewed it. "Who published this?" Victoria asked. Grayson stood abruptly. "Someone wants to damage her." Across town, Adeline discovered the article less than an hour later. A customer showed it to her while standing at the register. "Is this really about you?" the woman asked innocently. Adeline felt the color drain from her face. By evening, several more websites had copied the story. Social media comments multiplied. Strangers who knew nothing about her suddenly believed they knew everything. When she arrived home that night, she found reporters waiting near her apartment building. Cameras turned toward her. Questions flew through the air. Adeline lowered her head and hurried inside. Her hands trembled as she locked the door. For the first time since meeting Grayson, she felt genuinely overwhelmed. The next morning, a black car waited outside the bookstore. Adeline recognized it immediately. Grayson stepped out before she could walk away. He looked exhausted. "Adeline." She stopped but did not move closer. "What are you doing here?" "Trying to fix this." "You did not create those articles." "No." His eyes met hers. "But I know who did." Adeline frowned. "Who?" "Damien Cross." The name meant nothing to her. Grayson continued. "He sits on my board. He has wanted control of the company for years. He thinks if he damages your reputation, he can weaken me." Adeline stared at him. "People are attacking me because of a corporate power struggle?" "Yes." The absurdity of it left her speechless. Grayson took a careful step forward. "I am sorry." Adeline looked away. "You keep apologizing for things that are not your fault." "Maybe. But if I had told you the truth sooner, you would have been able to choose whether you wanted any part of this world." The honesty in his voice caught her off guard. For several seconds neither spoke. Finally, Adeline asked the question she had been avoiding. "Why do you care so much?" Grayson did not hesitate. "Because you matter to me." The words settled softly between them. No reporters. No cameras. No billion-dollar company. Just 2 people standing on a Boston sidewalk beneath a gray morning sky. Before Adeline could respond, Grayson's phone rang. He glanced at the screen and his expression hardened. Victoria's name flashed across it. He answered immediately. "What happened?" A pause followed. Then Victoria's voice came through the speaker. The board called an emergency vote. Damien is making his move. If you are going to stop him, it has to happen today. The ride to Hale Dynamics headquarters felt surreal. Adeline sat beside Grayson in the back of the car as Boston rushed past the windows. Neither spoke much. The tension of the morning lingered between them, mixed with something else neither wanted to name. When the tower finally came into view, Adeline understood for the first time the scale of the world Grayson belonged to. The glass building rose above the city skyline like a monument to ambition. Employees streamed through the entrance. News vans lined the street. Reporters clustered behind barricades. Cameras turned the moment Grayson stepped from the vehicle. Questions echoed through the air. He ignored them all. His attention remained fixed on the woman walking beside him. Inside, the executive floor buzzed with urgency. Victoria met them near the elevators. The board is already assembled, she said. Damien started 15 minutes ago. Grayson nodded. Good. Victoria glanced toward Adeline. You may want to stay here. Before Adeline could answer, Grayson spoke. No. She stays. Victoria studied him for a moment before giving a small smile. Understood. Minutes later, the boardroom doors opened. The room fell silent. A wall of windows overlooked the city. Around the long table sat some of the most influential people in American business. At the far end stood Damien Cross. Tall, polished, and confident, he looked almost pleased to see Grayson arrive. Well, Damien said smoothly, the missing CEO returns. Grayson walked forward without hesitation. I hear you have been busy. Damien smiled. Someone had to protect shareholder interests. Several board members shifted uncomfortably. Victoria distributed folders across the table. Damien glanced at them and frowned. What is this? Evidence, Victoria replied. Of what? Grayson stopped beside his chair. Of your campaign against me. And against an innocent woman. The room grew quiet. Damien's expression hardened. Victoria activated a screen mounted on the wall. Emails appeared. Financial records. Private communications. Documentation connecting Damien to the fabricated media stories targeting Adeline. One by one, the board members reviewed the information. The atmosphere changed rapidly. Confidence drained from Damien's face. This proves nothing, he argued. Actually, it proves quite a lot, one director replied coldly. Another shook his head. You used company resources for personal gain. A third closed the folder. This is unacceptable. For the next 20 minutes, the discussion intensified. By the time the final vote was called, the outcome was clear. Damien no longer controlled the room. He no longer controlled the narrative. The vote passed overwhelmingly. His position was terminated immediately. Silence settled over the boardroom. Damien stared at Grayson across the table. All of this over one woman? Grayson met his gaze calmly. No. All of this because integrity matters. Security escorted Damien from the room. The doors closed behind him. For the first time all morning, the tension eased. Several directors approached Grayson to offer congratulations. Reporters waited downstairs. Investors celebrated. The company was secure again. Yet Grayson barely noticed any of it. His attention found Adeline standing quietly near the windows. She looked completely out of place among the executives, and somehow she was the only person who felt real. An hour later, a press conference filled the lobby. Cameras flashed continuously. Journalists packed every available space. Victoria introduced Grayson before stepping aside. He approached the podium. Questions erupted immediately. He answered calmly, addressing the company, the board vote, and future plans. Then a reporter raised a hand. What about the rumors involving Adeline Hart? The room instantly grew still. Grayson looked out across the crowd. Then he glanced toward Adeline standing near the back. Their eyes met. For a moment everything else disappeared. The cameras, the executives, the noise. All of it faded away. Grayson turned back to the microphones. There is one thing I would like to clarify, he said. Every reporter leaned forward. Adeline Hart never asked me for money. She never asked for favors. She never asked for anything at all. The room remained silent. Grayson smiled softly. When the entire world knew my name, she was the only person who cared whether I had eaten dinner. When I had every resource imaginable, she gave me something I could not buy. Adeline felt her heart stop. Grayson's voice grew steadier. The truth is simple. The person I trust most is Adeline Hart. And the only woman I want in my life is her. For a second nobody moved. Then camera flashes exploded across the room as every headline in America changed at once. The weeks that followed changed everything. The headlines eventually faded. Reporters moved on to other stories. The noise surrounding Hale dynamics quieted. Life settled into something neither Adeline nor Grayson had expected. Not perfect. Not effortless. Just real. For the first time since the truth came out, they began learning who each other truly were.
No disguises. No secrets. No hidden identities.
Some evenings Grayson would leave his office early and meet Adeline at a small coffee shop near the bookstore. Other nights they walked along the river, talking for hours about everything and nothing. The more Adeline learned about the man behind the headlines, the more she understood why he had disappeared in the first place. Beneath the success, the wealth, and the public image was someone who had been lonely for a very long time. And the more Grayson learned about Adeline, the more he admired her determination. She never stopped working. Never stopped dreaming. Never stopped believing that kindness mattered. 3 months later, Grayson arrived at the bookstore carrying a folder. Adeline looked up from behind the counter and smiled. "You have that look again." "What look?" "The one that means you are planning something." Grayson laughed. "Maybe." He handed her the folder. Curious, Adeline opened it. Her eyes widened immediately. Architectural drawings. Financial projections. Renovation plans. Every page looked familiar, because every page had been inspired by her notebook. "What is this?" she whispered. "Your bookstore." Adeline stared at him. "Grayson." He gently shook his head. "It is not a gift. It is an investment." She looked up. "What?" "You wrote the business plan. You did the research. You created the vision. I simply helped open a door." Tears filled her eyes before she could stop them. 6 months later, Blue Blanket Books opened its doors. The name made everyone smile, though. Only 2 people truly understood its meaning. The cozy bookstore sat on a corner lined with brick sidewalks and flowering trees. Reading chairs filled the front window. Community events filled the calendar. Families gathered there on weekends. Local authors held signings. Children discovered their favorite stories. The dream Adeline once carried inside a worn notebook had become real. One evening nearly a year after the storm that brought them together, the bookstore closed for the night. Adeline finished straightening a display table before switching off the lights. As she turned around, she noticed something unusual. Soft golden lamps glowed throughout the store. Candles flickered on nearby shelves. And standing in the center of the room was Grayson. Her heart immediately began racing. "What is going on?" she asked. Grayson smiled. "Come with me." He led her toward a corner reading area she had designed herself. Mounted on the wall inside a glass display case hung a familiar navy blue blanket. The same blanket she had given a sick stranger on a rainy night nearly 1 year earlier. Adeline covered her mouth. "You kept it." "Of course I did." Grayson stepped closer. "It was the first gift anyone ever gave me without wanting something in return." Emotion tightened her throat. "Grayson." He reached into his jacket pocket. Then he lowered himself onto one knee. For a moment Adeline forgot how to breathe. The bookstore fell silent around them. "The night we met, you looked at a man sitting alone in the rain and decided he mattered." His voice softened. "You did not know my name. You did not know my title. You did not know anything about me. But you opened your door anyway." Tears slipped down Adeline's cheeks. Grayson opened a small velvet box. Inside rested a simple, elegant ring. "You gave me a home when I felt lost. You reminded me what matters. You changed my life, Adeline Hart." His eyes never left hers. "Will you marry me?" For one beautiful second the entire world seemed to stop. Then Adeline laughed through her tears and nodded. "Yes." Grayson slipped the ring onto her finger as she pulled him into a hug. Outside, the city lights shimmered against the evening sky. Inside Blue Blanket Books, surrounded by dreams that had finally come true, 2 people stood together exactly where they belonged. And for the first time, neither of them needed to be anyone else. If this story touched your heart, please like this video, share it with someone who believes in true love, and subscribe to Chosen by Love for more emotional romance stories. Your support helps us bring more stories of kindness, healing, and love that sees beyond money, status, and appearances.